I can't tell you the exact moment it happened. There was no decision, no breakdown, no dramatic confession whispered into the dark. If there had been, maybe I would have noticed it in time. Instead, I gave up on myself quietly. It felt like being reasonable, responsible, like choosing peace over chaos. I didn't storm out of my life, I settled into it. Carefully. Politely. One compromise at a time. From the outside, nothing looked wrong. My life made sense. It had structure, rhythm, explanation. People knew how to describe me, and that alone felt like proof that I was doing something right. Inside, I felt strangely absent from it all. I still remember how I used to think. There was a time when choices felt alive, when the future wasn't a checklist but a question. Back then, uncertainty scared me, but it also pulled me forward. I felt like my life was something I was actively stepping into. At some point, that feeling faded. I started choosing things that reduced risk instead of expanding possibility. I told myself it was maturity. I said I was being realistic, that dreams don't pay bills, that stability matters more than desire. Each of those statements sounded wise enough to silence doubt. And little by little, doubt stopped knocking. That should have scared me. It didn't. What scared me back then was disruption. The idea of starting over. The possibility of wanting the wrong thing. I learned to see longing as a liability, not a signal. So I trimmed it down until it fit neatly inside my life. I didn't feel unhappy. That's the part people don't understand. There was no constant sadness, no visible despair. I laughed. I worked. I showed up. I did what was expected, and I did it well enough that no one worried about me. I even told myself I was content. But contentment without presence is just numbness with good manners. Time began to blur. Days stopped leaving impressions. Weeks passed without memory. When I looked back, everything seemed compressed, like nothing had really happened even though so much time had gone by. I noticed it first in conversation. How often I spoke without revealing anything real. How quickly I agreed just to move things along. I wasn't lying, I was editing. Constantly. Editing who I was so I wouldn't have to explain myself. At night, when the house was quiet, I felt a pressure in my chest that had no name. Not anxiety. Not grief. Just a weight that made it hard to fully breathe. I would lie there and ask myself when I had last felt deeply engaged with my own life. The answer was always further back than I wanted it to be. I realized I had been living as if my real life would start later. After the next phase. After things settled. After I felt more confident, more prepared, more worthy of wanting something different. Later became my refuge. But later is a dangerous place to live. Because while you're waiting, life doesn't pause. It keeps moving forward, quietly collecting the cost of your hesitation. Every year you tell yourself not now, you teach yourself that your own needs can wait indefinitely. I didn't feel trapped. I felt accommodated. My life had made space for everything except me. The strangest part was how invisible the loss was. Nothing obvious had been taken from me. I had simply stopped reaching. Stopped asking. Stopped insisting that my inner life mattered as much as my outer one. Sometimes, I caught my reflection in a dark window or a mirror when I wasn't expecting it. There was a look in my eyes I didn't recognize. Not sadness. Not anger. Resignation. That's when I began to understand what had happened. I hadn't failed at becoming someone else. I had succeeded at disappearing into what was expected of me. No one forced me. No one threatened me. I agreed to it willingly because it felt safer than confronting the possibility that I might want a different life and that wanting it would change everything. The truth settled slowly, painfully. I didn't notice the moment I gave up on myself because giving up didn't feel like loss. It felt like relief. And that scared me more than any mistake ever could. After that realization, nothing around me actually changed, and that was the most unsettling part. The same walls, the same routines, the same people. Yet everything felt exposed, like a stage after the audience leaves. I could see how carefully my life had been arranged to avoid asking anything of me beyond endurance. I began to notice how often I chose comfort over truth. Not consciously, not dramatically, automatically. I avoided conversations that might reveal what I felt. I kept my opinions soft, flexible, easily adjustable. I learned how to agree without meaning it and smile without arriving. People described me as calm, balanced, easy to be around. I accepted those labels because they explained my distance in flattering ways. But calm wasn't peace. It was disengagement. You can't be shaken if you're not fully present. My body started responding before my mind was ready to admit anything. Sleep stopped restoring me. I woke up tired, as if I had spent the night negotiating with myself. My chest felt tight during ordinary moments, standing in line, sitting in traffic, listening to someone talk about a future that felt abstract and unreachable. Sometimes my heart raced for no reason at all. I would stand there, breathing slowly, telling myself nothing was wrong. Everyone feels this sometimes. Everyone gets tired. Everyone doubts. But this wasn't doubt. It was erosion. I realized how much effort went into maintaining the version of myself that required the least explanation. I edited my words mid-sentence. I swallowed questions before they reached my mouth. I learned to sense when honesty would make others uncomfortable, and I chose silence every time. Wanting had become dangerous. Wanting meant disruption. Late at night, when the distractions finally failed, a quiet grief surfaced, not the grief of losing something specific, but the grief of losing time. Years that had passed without leaving fingerprints. Decisions that had never been made because they felt too heavy to hold. I replayed memories, not to relieve them, but to investigate them. I searched for the moment where I could have chosen differently. Spoken up. Walked away. Trusted the feeling that something was wrong even when everything looked fine. There was no single moment to blame. Just a pattern. A long series of almosts. I almost said no. I almost left. I almost chose myself. That realization hurt more than any obvious mistake ever could. Mistakes imply action. They imply risk. What I felt was the pain of omission of everything I hadn't tried because it felt safer not to. The moral dilemma grew impossible to ignore. If I stayed exactly where I was, nothing terrible would happen. That was the promise. I would continue functioning. Continue being needed. Continue meeting expectations. I would age gently inside a life that didn't require my presence. If I tried to reclaim myself, everything would become uncertain. I would disappoint people who relied on my predictability. I would lose the comfort of being understood. I would risk discovering that I had waited too long, that the part of me capable of wanting more no longer existed. That possibility terrified me more than staying ever had. Some nights, the thought of disappearing returned. Not dying, disappearing. Stepping away from the version of my life that required constant self-editing. Starting somewhere I wasn't already defined, where my past didn't arrive before I did. The idea frightened me. And relieved me. That contradiction made it impossible to dismiss this as just another phase. I tried to talk myself out of it. I reminded myself of gratitude, of responsibility, of how much worse things could be. I had used those arguments for years, and they had always worked. Now they sounded hollow. Then came a moment so ordinary it almost slipped past me. Someone asked me a simple question, without accusation or drama. Are you happy like this? I opened my mouth to answer automatically. To reassure. To minimize. To say something polite and final. Nothing came out. The silence stretched, heavy and exposed. And in that silence, something inside me finally broke through the rehearsed answers. "I don't know who I am doing this for anymore," I said quietly. The words surprised me. They felt unprotected. Dangerous. But once spoken, they rearranged something inside me. They made the truth solid. That night, I didn't sleep. Not because I was anxious, but because something in me refused to return to quiet surrender. I realized that my life wasn't falling apart. It was wearing thin. And no one else could see it. From the outside, everything still looked fine. That meant the responsibility was mine alone. I couldn't wait for permission. I couldn't wait for certainty. I couldn't wait for the right time anymore. For the first time, staying felt like an active decision instead of a default. And once you see that, there is no neutral ground left. I knew the next step would cost me something: comfort, approval, certainty, or time. I just didn't know yet which cost I was finally willing to pay. I didn't reclaim myself in a dramatic way. There was no moment of clarity that erased doubt, no clean decision that made everything make sense. What finally changed was simpler and harder. I stopped pretending that staying was harmless. Once I saw that my silence was a choice, not an accident, it became impossible to keep performing it. Every day I remained exactly where I was felt like consent. Consent to keep shrinking. Consent to keep trading presence for predictability. So I withdrew, not with anger, not with rebellion, but with refusal. I stopped agreeing automatically. I stopped filling space just to keep things comfortable. I stopped explaining myself in advance, as if my existence needed to be justified. These weren't brave actions. They felt awkward, almost rude. I had spent years learning how to smooth edges, how to make myself easy to be around. Letting that go felt like breaking an unspoken rule. People noticed. They didn't always ask directly, but I could feel the shift. The confusion. The subtle discomfort. I was no longer as available, as agreeable, as predictable. Some people tried to pull me back with concern. Others with reminders of who I had always been. I listened. And for the first time, I didn't adjust myself in response. Fear didn't disappear when I did that. It intensified. It told me I was late. That whatever I tried now would only highlight how much time I had already lost. It reminded me of everything I had invested in the life I was questioning: years, effort, identity. There were nights when that fear almost convinced me to return. To apologize. To shrink back into the version of myself that knew how to survive quietly. Nights when loneliness felt like punishment and doubt felt precise and unforgiving. But even in those moments, something was different. I was present. The discomfort didn't feel distant anymore. It hurt sharply, immediately, but it belonged to me. I wasn't numbing it. I wasn't explaining it away. I was feeling it. That was new. Trying to return to myself didn't feel like freedom. It felt like emptiness. Like standing in a room after everything familiar has been removed, unsure where anything belongs. Without the structure of expectation guiding me, I had to face myself directly: my fear, my hesitation, my long neglected desires. I was clumsy. Often unsure. I made decisions without guarantees and lived with the discomfort of not knowing whether they were right. I learned that presence doesn't come with confidence, it comes with attention. Slowly, time began to change texture. Days stopped blurring together. Moments stayed with me. Even ordinary things felt heavier, not because they were difficult, but because I was actually there for them. I wasn't waiting for my life to begin anymore. I was participating. I grieved what I had lost. That grief didn't disappear when I started moving. It still visits me sometimes, quietly. I mourn the years I spent adapting instead of choosing, surviving instead of living. But I no longer let that grief make my decisions for me. I learned something I wish I had understood earlier. Regret doesn't come from choosing the wrong path. It comes from never choosing your own. From letting fear, habit, and expectation decide until your inner life goes silent. Reclaiming myself didn't make my life easy. It didn't make it clean or impressive. Some relationships didn't survive the change. Some paths closed permanently. I carry those consequences with me. But I also carry something I didn't have before. Ownership. Ownership of my fear. Ownership of my uncertainty. Ownership of the life I am still learning how to live. I no longer confuse endurance with virtue. I no longer confuse comfort with meaning. And I no longer confuse disappearing quietly with being at peace. If you're listening to this and something inside you feels uncomfortably awake, I want to tell you to burn your life down or walk away from everything. Not every situation requires escape. But every situation requires honesty. Ask yourself gently, without judgment, whether you are living your life, or managing it. Whether the calm you feel is peace, or just the absence of conflict with expectations. Because one day, quietly, without warning, you may realize that nothing is broken, and you are still missing. I didn't notice the moment I gave up on myself. I noticed the moment I stopped doing it. It wasn't heroic. It wasn't late enough to be useless. It was enough. And choosing yourself even slowly, even imperfectly, is not a second chance. It's the first real one.